All right, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Luke chapter 15. Um, so let me remind you, because this is a fascinating chapter. Or I'm going to say really two chapters with the beginning of chapter 17. And all of this started with Jesus going to eat at the house of Pharisees, and he goes to eat, and then um, the Pharisees um, they criticize him as they have been doing. Now, there's also some, and I'm going to say, as what Jesus has been dealing with, negative connotation for religion. I mean, just what Jesus in his ministry have been showing repeatedly is just how bad religion could be. And the reason why is because, so when we look at religion, the religion, as James said, in its pure form, it's just really, it's an observance, but it is doing God's will, doing God's heart. Um, the two commandments, which the whole entire law is built on, is to love God with all of your heart, and then to love your neighbor as yourself. And then when you look at all of the other commandments, you see what all of the other commandments, that they are based upon those two commandments. Thou shalt not steal. Why? You're doing your brother wrong. Don't worship idols. You are sinning against God. Now, religion comes along and kind of etch those two out, and then focus and say, well, what God really wants you to do is to observe my commandments so that the good of people don't matter. In other words, it's more important that you do certain religious things more than anything else. And they think that that's what God thinks. And so when Jesus, when they criticize Jesus, he's telling a series of parables. Well, the one about when the man lost his sheep, how he went after the sheep. He didn't say, well, did they violate any commands? That the heart of a true shepherd was to go after the sheep. And now with the story of the what's called the prodigal son, and as I said, it's really the parable is not labeled the prodigal son. Those are headlines. Let me see if I can see here. Those are well, here at least it says lost son. But the reality, even with this, is that this is really not what the parable is about. Let me go back and read so you can see this right here. He says, all the tax collectors and sinners were approaching to listen to him. So watch this. So you would think that the religious people would be rejoicing in that, right? Here are sinners who are listening to Jesus teaching. You would think they would be rejoicing in that. No, 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 no. He says, and the Pharisees and the scribes were complaining, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So this is what these parables are about. That's why I said when you get down here that the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son, it's not about the prodigal son. It's about these jokers that were complaining that Jesus receives the prodigal son or the lost son. Okay? And so it starts off, of course, by saying that you had the younger son who asked his father, demanded of his father to give his inheritance. So his father said, okay, fine. Gave out the inheritance. Now you would also note, so let me read this again. It's worth reading. It's worth going over. He says he also said a man had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate I have coming to me. So he distributed his assets to them, right? So he gave it to them. So both sons have it. So later we're going to see, what are you complaining about? All right. Not many days later, the younger son gathered together all he had and traveled to a distant country where he squandered his estate on foolish living. After he had spent everything, on a severe famine struck the country and he had nothing. Then he went to work for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the field to feed pigs. And he longed to eat his fill from the carob pods. And he said it was this kind of plant, actually, what it is. It's a plant. It doesn't even look peeling if you look at pictures of it. He says from the carob pods the pigs were eating, but no one would give him anything. He couldn't even eat that food. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough food, and here I am dying of hunger? I'll get up and I'll go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired hands. So the humility here that was shown by his actions. So he got up and went to his father, but while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. So we see another component right here. His father never lost his compassion for his son, never lost his love for his son, and never disowned his son. So he got up and went to his father, but while his son was still a ways off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. The father told his slaves, quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then bring the fatted calf and slaughter it. And let's celebrate with the feast, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Now, you note now that he said he's lost and is found. So remember, he told the other parables about what? The lost sheep, the lost coin. And now the son is lost, but now he's found. So you would think this would be cause for celebration in the family. Now, the rest of the estate was celebrating, but watch this now, verse 25. Now his older son, now remember I told you, this is what the story is about. Because it's about how the Pharisees were complaining that Jesus received sinners who came to Jesus to be taught by him, to listen to him. Now his oldest son was in the field, and as he came near the house, he heard the music and dancing. And so he summoned one of the servants and asked what these things meant. He says, your brother is here, he told him, and your father has slaughtered the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and didn't want to go in, so his father came out and pleaded with him. But he replied to his father, look, I have been slaving many years for you. Notice his characterization. And I have never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me a young goat so that I can celebrate with my friends. But let us stop for a moment now. You remember when the younger son said, give me my portion, he gave them both. So a little kind of, he's mixing up some things here. In other words, his complaint, I'm going to say this ungrateful son, his complaint was that you enjoyed the grace of your father. You were the oldest son. You still ran the estate with your father. And so now he's complaining, well, you didn't give me a kid to celebrate with my friends. So again, you kind of get the mentality. And you also say he wouldn't go in. So we go back to the original what sparked all of this was they wouldn't go in and eat with sinners. They were too holy, too pure to eat with sinners. So he says, verse 30, but when this son of yours came, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you slaughtered the fatted calf. You slaughtered the fatted calf. Oh, I lost my thing. Verse 30 again. But when this son of yours, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you slaughtered the fatted calf for him. So he's kind of worried about the calf, right? He's worried about the fatted calf, and that his father didn't throw a party to celebrate him. So we kind of see his true motive, his true heart, that he hated his brother and was jealous at his brother. But notice what he says, verse 31 says, son, he said to him, you are always with me. Okay? You are always with me. And everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. Again, he was lost and is found. So what's your problem? Jesus didn't say that. But he does have a problem. But again, so what this, again, it shows you, excuse me, it shows you how bad religion can be. Because the older son represents religion. The Pharisees and the scribes, remember, that's who they represent, that they're so hard. And as I said, they don't see the heart of the Father. They don't see the heart of God. By the way, they were just as corrupt. And this story kind of reminds me, in a way, of Jonah. The story of Jonah. And I'm going to, just from one aspect, so I'm not saying that Jonah was like the Pharisees. However, here is an aspect of the story of Jonah. Now, we know it from the great fish that Jonah was swallowed by a big whale. Okay. But when you go back and you read the story of Jonah, I think it's only 3, maybe 4 small chapters. So it's not long at all, but it has an impact to the story. God tells Jonah, a prophet, to go to the city of Nineveh. Now watch this. Nineveh was a pagan city, a gentile city. They were extremely corrupt. The Assyrians were brutal, cruel people. Nineveh was the kind of capital city, and it was a bustling metropolis. So for its day, it was a huge city. And God says, go preach to Nineveh, and said, in 40 days, I'm going to overthrow the city. Now, at first, Jonah, and watch this, so we don't know his motives yet. Jonah hops on a boat and goes the opposite way. And what's interesting is that, as if he thought he can escape God, So God begins to send a storm against the boat, and the people in the boat was like, okay, I don't even know how they knew this, but they begin to they begin to say they begin to say um, um, they begin to say, okay, one of y'all is the reason why we're having this storm right here. Maybe it was some unusual storm. So one of y'all gods is the one that's punishing it. And Jonah finally said, okay, it's me. Yeah, it's me. So um, and then he also tells them, look, if you throw me overboard, the storm will cease. But they kept trying to roll and all that, and finally it says, okay, well, we got to throw you over. And then, as you know, he throws them over, and then God had prepared this great fish. Comes and swallow Jonah. Jonah's in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, which becomes a symbol, a sign of the resurrection, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. After 3 days, Jonah goes, okay, I repent, God. The fish vomits him up on the land, washes himself off, and he heads for Nineveh. He starts at one point, he starts to preach. In 40 days, God is going to overthrow you. But something spectacular happens to Nineveh. And then we see the real reason why Jonah why he fled. A lot of people thought he was just fleeing from God for whatever reason, but here is the real reason that Jonah fled. He fled because when he started preaching, the whole town said, oh my God, God is getting ready to judge us. And everybody repented. The king got an order, said, look, I want everybody in sackcloth and ashes. I want even the animals in sackcloth and ashes. Okay, everybody. And God saw that and God relented. He turned. Now understand, this is the whole town. This is one of the greatest revivals that an evangelist could hope for. I still don't know where you have that many people that repented. And I mean really repented. They just didn't respond. They just didn't respond to an altar call. But 120,000 people, that was the population, 120,000 people repented. And God saw that. And you know what Jonas did? Instead of rejoicing, he said, oh, I knew you was going to do that. Jonah's attitude was, you're merciful. And I knew Jonah wanted God to wipe out the Ninevites. He wanted God to destroy them. Now, he had good reason in that they were brutal people. However, look, Jonah, you had one of the greatest revivals ever. As I said, I have never ever seen anywhere where that kind of crusade yielded 120,000 people repenting. 120,000. Even the modern day crusades that you see with people, you don't see 120,000 repenting. You can have large crowds. You may have 60, 70, 80,000, but you never ever see that the entire crowd repents. Not the entire crowd. So you have 5,000 or whatever, 10,000 respond to the altar call, and then out of that, how many people actually got saved? And yet, that wasn't what he was mad because God didn't destroy them. But again, here's religion. He was mad because God didn't destroy them, but wasn't rejoicing that people came to God. And this is what we see here in this same story here that Jesus is responding to. That you had sinners coming to, and remember, they were coming to listen to Jesus. Not like some of these people who always ask me, or you always hear people say, well, Jesus hung out with sinners and stuff. And what they mean by that, Jesus was twerking with them, juking with them, dancing, all that. No, These sinners came to hear Jesus, to be taught by Jesus. Later, we're going to see that Zacchaeus ran, a tax collector ran and climbed the tree to see Jesus. And it's a wonderful thing. It should have been a wonderful thing from the Pharisees, these religious hypocrites. It should be a wonderful thing when people came to listen, to change their ways. That's why I say bad religion is bad. Okay. All right, guys. Do not forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.